Today we are diving into one of the most brutal situations in all history, the medieval siege. And I want you to forget all the stuff you've seen in movies. The heroic knights and the chivalry. We're going to get into the gritty, frankly terrifying reality of what it actually took to survive when an enemy army was banging on your door. So, just imagine it. You're inside a huge castle. The gates are locked down tight, and an entire army is setting up camp right outside. Your walls, they look like they could stand forever. But the real fight for your life, it's only just begun, and it is not the one you're expecting. All right, first up, let's talk about the part of a siege everybody thinks of, the big, loud, direct attack on the castle itself. This was a brutal, step-by-step process, and it was designed to break not just the stone walls, but the will of the people inside. You see, an attacking army didn't just run screaming at the walls. No. First, they would completely surround the castle. That's encirclement. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out. Then came the trenching, where they dig these zigzag tunnels to get closer without being shot. Once they were in range, that's when the bombardment began, paving the way for the final assault. And how did they break those massive walls? Well, with the medieval version of heavy artillery. The absolute king of them all was the trebuchet, a gigantic catapult that could sling stones weighing hundreds of pounds. It could just pulverize stone walls. It was so powerful that people at the time called it both a work of genius and, literally, a weapon from hell. But here's the thing. For all that raw power, for all the chaos of an assault, that wasn't actually the best way to take a castle. The attacker's real weapon, their greatest weapon, was simply time. They knew the real battle wasn't happening out there. It was happening inside.
So let's go inside the walls, because the first huge problem you're facing is food. A siege was basically a race against the clock before everyone starved. And castle planners, they got ready for this with what you could call medieval superfoods.
The absolute foundation of any good defense was grain. Lots and lots of it. Castles had these massive, specially built granaries to keep out damp and rats. In there, wheat could last for a year and a half, and barley could be good for over 3 years. This stuff was the fuel that kept the whole defense running.
And to give you an idea of the sheer scale we're talking about, get this. For just one siege, Dover Castle in England had over 3,000 pounds of hard cheese stored away. That is the weight of a small car in cheese. And this stuff was so hard it could last for years. Soldiers would just carry a chunk and scrape off bits with a knife.
Of course, you can't live on bread and cheese forever. So they had other tricks. They'd bury pork in barrels full of salt to preserve it. They'd dry fish until it was like a board. They'd pickle vegetables. And, maybe most importantly, before the siege started, they would herd all the live animals, chickens, pigs, even cows, right into the castle courtyards. A living, breathing food supply.
Okay, so they've got food, they've got thick walls. They should be fine, right? Well, no. Because as the weeks and months dragged on, the castle itself, the very thing that was supposed to protect them, started to become their deadliest enemy. See, the survival of a castle didn't come down to just what was in its pantry. It came down to its plumbing. And this, right here, is where sieges were so often won and lost. The absolute lifeline of any fortress was its well. You had to have a safe, internal source of fresh water. That was non-negotiable. Digging a well through solid rock could take decades and cost a fortune, but without it, you were doomed from the start. The enemy could poison a river, but the castle well was supposed to be safe. Or so they thought.
And here's where it all goes horribly wrong. Imagine a castle built for, say, 200 people. Now cram 2,000 soldiers and refugees inside. The toilets, the latrines, they start overflowing. All that livestock you brought inside, their waste starts piling up everywhere. The moat just becomes a swamp of garbage. The entire castle turns into a paradise for flies and rats.
It's almost impossible for us to imagine, but the sheer amount of human and animal waste would turn the entire courtyard into a toxic swamp. A sludge of mud and filth that got on everything and everyone. The smell alone must have been unbearable, a constant reminder that things were falling apart.
And where does all that filth eventually go? It soaks down into the ground and right into the well. The castle's only source of clean water is now poison. And that's when disease just rips through the population. Dysentery, they called it the bloody flux, was the most terrifying. It was a violent sickness that killed way more people inside those walls than any sword ever could.
So now you have rampant disease, and the food supplies, even those massive stores, are finally starting to run out. Life inside the walls just descends into an absolute nightmare. Survival means doing the unthinkable. When the food was gone, the menu became something out of a horror story. People ate the rats, which were everywhere. They would boil the leather from their own armor, from their shoes, just to soften it enough to chew. They ground up tree bark to make a disgusting kind of flour. They even boiled old documents made of animal skin and ate candle wax for a few extra calories. And the whole time, the enemy outside knew exactly how bad things were getting, so they'd weaponize it. They would use their trebuchets to launch rotting animal carcasses over the walls, sometimes even the bodies of their own soldiers who had died of the plague. This was medieval germ warfare, and it was designed to spread even more sickness and just crush morale. All of this led to one of the most brutal, awful decisions a commander could make. To save the last bits of food for the soldiers who could still fight, they would sometimes force the civilians, women, children, the elderly, out of the castle gates. They called them useless mouths. They were just abandoned, left to face the enemy army alone. So after everything we've talked about, the attacks, the starvation, the disease, what was it that actually brought these mighty fortresses to their knees? Well, the answer might surprise you. It almost never ended with a dramatic battle at the walls. When you look at why sieges actually ended, the numbers are shocking. The vast, overwhelming majority of them ended not because the walls were smashed down, but because the people inside were either dying of starvation or dying of disease. A direct assault was expensive and dangerous for the attackers. Just waiting was cheaper and a whole lot deadlier. And that really is the main takeaway here. You could build a stone wall 20 feet thick to stop an army. You could have enough food to last for years. But what you couldn't do was build your way out of basic human biology. At the end of the day, the body's simple need for clean water and a clean environment was a weakness that no castle could overcome. And that leaves us with this incredible irony, doesn't it? A fortress was built for one reason, to keep danger out. But in the end, it became a trap. Its greatest strength, those unbreakable walls, was also its greatest weakness, sealing everyone inside with the very things that were guaranteed to kill them. Thanks for joining me on this one.